Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Maddie if you're new here, and in today's video I'm going to tell you about the 105 books I read in 2023. So let's get started. And the first book I read in January 2023 is concerning. The first book I read this year was Priest by Sierra Simone. Basically just a spicy book with no plot. I probably wouldn't recommend it. I've heard the other books in that interconnected standalone series are better, so maybe check those out instead. Next, I read The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine, and I really enjoyed it. Then I read If He Had Been With Me by Laura Nolan. This was super popular on TikTok this year. It's a young adult romance that will rip your heart into shreds. Next, I read Every Last Word by Tamara Ireland Stone. This was a young adult book and it was about mental health, and it was great to see that representation. Next, I read The Hotel Nantucket by Ellen Hildebrand, and this was my first Ellen Hildebrand book and I ate it up. Then I read Daisy Jones and the Six. And I'm sorry guys, I'm a Daisy Jones and the Six hater. I said it. I'm a hater for this book, okay? Love Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my least favorite book of hers. Then I read The Mistake by Elle Kennedy, which is the second book in the Off-Campus series, and I liked it. I need to finish the Off-Campus series in 2024 because I love Elle Kennedy and her books. They're always so fun. A good, mindless, spicy read. Next, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney. Obsessed. Obsessed with the book, obsessed with the show. Must read. You either love it or you hate it. Then I read Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. This is a thriller and there is actually a Netflix movie based off this now. It took me a while to get into it, but once I was hooked, I couldn't put it down, and I definitely recommend it. Then I read Before We Were Strangers by Renee Carlino, and it was cute, but now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember anything about the book. Then I read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, my first Frida McFadden book, and I really liked it. I was thrown off though because it is the exact same plot as The Last Mrs. Parrish, and I think I like The Last Mrs. Parrish more. Next, I had to finish the ACOTAR series because I read the first 3 in 2022, so I read A Court of Frost and Starlight, and I thought it was such a cute novella. If you're gonna skip this book, don't. I definitely recommend you read it. And then finally, I read Nesta's story in A Court of Silver Flames. It took me a while to get into it, but I ended up rating this 5 stars and I really enjoyed it. Next, I read Beautiful Disaster by Jamie Maguire because I saw there was a movie coming out with Dylan Sprouse in it. And I read the book and there was nothing beautiful about it. It was just a disaster. The movie was so bad it was funny though. After that, I read Heartbones by Colleen Hoover and I really liked it. Maybe one of my favorite Colleen Hoover books. Then I read Local Woman Missing and I thought it was a good thriller. Next, I read Shadow and Bone. I liked the first book. I went to pick up the rest of the series. I started reading the second book and I DNF'd it. Not for me. Then I read Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman and I liked it. It's dark though. It is a dark romance. That was my first dark romance I think I've ever read. If you like dark romance, check it out. If you don't check it out. Next, I read My Dark Romeo by Parker S. Huntington and I believe LJ Shen, and I loved it. I know a lot of people hate this book, but I'm not one of them. Then I wanted something dark. I read Haunting Adeline and then I read Hunting Adeline, and I think those were a little too dark for me, at least the second one, but I enjoyed them nonetheless. Then I picked up Magnolia Parks and I read the whole series. I read the first 3 books back to back and I absolutely recommend. Next, I read a book of the month, which was The Reunion by Kayla Olson, and I thought this was adorable. I think I gave it 4 stars. Would recommend. I picked up the Mindfuck series after that by St. Abbey and devoured them. Recommend, but it is dark, so just be wary of that. Next, I read The Brightest Light of Sunshine by Lucina Connie. and I thought it was super sweet. Recommend for sure. I read The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave, and it was a good thriller. Definitely not one of my top thrillers this year, but 3 to 4 stars. And then I got my hands on Daisy Hates the Great Undoing, which is the 4th book in the series and the last one that's currently out, and I ate it up. Christian and Daisy are my favorite. I love Magnolia and BJ, but Christian and Daisy are it for me. Next, I read Say You Swear by Megan Brandy, and although it took me a while to get into it, I absolutely loved it. It was sad, but I definitely recommend. I read Then She Was Gone by Lisa Joel, my first Lisa Joel book. I flew through it, I think, in one day. I read You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel, and I remember not liking this book too much. Next, I read Misfit by Elle Kennedy, and I really liked it. It took place at a boarding school, and I love when books take place in college or at boarding school. It makes me feel young again. Then I read The Inmate by Frida McFadden, which is probably my favorite thriller of the year. The epilogue had me shook. If you're gonna read a book by Frida McFadden, read The Inmate. Next, I read 8,000 Boy Kisses because I wanted to feel pain, and I did. After that, I needed something dark because A Million Boy Kisses was so fluffy, and I read Hooked by Emily McIntyre and absolutely devoured it. It was such a good book. I need to read more in the Never After series because I really liked Emily's writing. Oh, I forgot I reread Beach Read in between some of those books, and you guys know how I feel about this. One of my favorite books of all time. Love you, Emily Henry. And then the hype about Fourth Wing was at an all-time high, so I picked it up and loved it. Such a fun world. Next, I wanted to get into the Throne of Glass series, so I read Assassin's Blade first, and then I read Throne of Glass. And honestly, I wasn't that impressed, so I put the series down. I will come back to it later. Next, I read my first Abby Jimenez book called Part of Your World. 5 stars. Go read it right now. Oh, I included Icebreaker on this because I got maybe 75% of the way through and DNF'd it, but I included it on my 2023. I didn't like it. Obviously, I DNF'd it. Then I was like, okay, let's get back into Throne of Glass, and I read Crown of Midnight. It was all right. I picked up She Started It by Sean Gilbert. I hope that's how you say her name. And I really enjoyed it. This was her debut novel, and I thought it was a good thriller. I had to do a reread of It's Not Summer Without You by Jenny Han because season 2 of The Summer I Turned Pretty was coming out soon, and I really liked this book. You forget how sad it is though. Then I read Twisted Love, and I was not a fan. Then I picked up We'll Always Have Summer by Jenny Han because I actually don't think I finished the series when I was younger. I remember reading the first and second book, but never finishing the third one. And of course I loved it because Belly and you-know-who end up together happily ever after. I was at the beach in July, so I read The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther, and I loved it. 5 stars. I also read The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren at the beach and loved it. Definitely recommend. Next, I read Our Scorching Summer by Kels and Denise Stone, and I didn't really care for it. Next, I read Never Lie by Frida McFadden, another crazy thriller. Then I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage and ate it up. Then I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder in literally a few hours, and it was incredible. Next, I read Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and it was beautiful. Then I humored myself because I saw a booktalker talk about this movie called My Fault, and I realized it was a book first, so I wanted to read the book before I saw the movie, and the book was a beautiful disaster, let's say. The movie was so bad that it was good though. It was one of those. Don't recommend the book. Then I read Mad Honey by Jodi Picoult, and it was so good. The ending wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be, but nonetheless, I recommend it. After loving The Summer of Broken Rules by K.L. Walther, I picked up their newest release, What Happens After Midnight, and it was just mid. Then I picked up the second book in A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, Good Girl, Bad Blood, and I hated it. So then I put down the series for a while, thinking I wasn't gonna finish it. Next, I read Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, and this made me love the accidental pregnancy trope. Definitely recommend. Next, I read the Heartstopper graphic novels. I counted these as one book because they're such a quick read. You guys know I love the books, I love the TV show, obsessed. Then I read A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, and I really like this book. This is my favorite Stacey Willingham book. Then I listened to the audiobook of Nick and Charlie, and it was such a cute listen. I was so excited to read Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, and unfortunately, this is my least favorite Ali Hazelwood book. But other people love it, so go see for yourself. Then I read Spare by Prince Harry, and it was way longer than it needed to be, but nonetheless, I enjoyed it. Then I read my least favorite book of the year, Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. You can skip this one. Then The Serpent and the Wings of Night was popping off on TikTok because people wanted another book like Fourth Wing. And so I read it and I wasn't impressed. I did not pick up the second book or the novella in the series. Then I listened to the audiobook of I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and it was amazing to listen to it in her own voice because she narrates the audiobook, and I thought it was a really important story and I enjoyed it. Then I read All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham, and this one was okay. It wasn't as good as her other novel. Then I read None of This Is True by Lisa Joel, a runner-up for my least favorite book of the year. I loved the other book I read by Lisa Joel this year, but this one just had me frustrated. Then I was reading classics for a video, and I read The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, and it wasn't as boring as I thought it was going to be. Next, I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Although it was hard for me to get through, I do love the story. Then I read Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom, and it was beautiful. Then I read Solitaire by Alice Oseman because I'm just obsessed with the Heartstopper world, universe, whatever you call it, and this was a really good one because it focuses on Tori instead of Nick and Charlie, so it was good to hear from her and see her point of view. Then Heather McCleary was obsessing over Ice Planet Barbarians, so of course I was influenced and I read the first book and I thought it was fun, okay? There's a difference between a fun read and a good read, and this was a fun read. Then I decided to finish out A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, and I listened to As Good as Dead, which is the third book, on audiobook, and guys, this book saved the series for me. So many people either love or hate the final book, and I love the third book. It changed everything. It was 5 stars, one of my favorite reads of the year, and I think about the ending from time to time. Then I read The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. Meh, didn't really care for this one. Next, I read Georgie All Along by Kate Claiborne, and this is an underdog book of the year. I really enjoyed it, and I will read anything else that Kate writes. Then I went back to Ice Planet Barbarians and I read the second one. I had a fun time with that one as well. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Atomic Habits and I really enjoyed it. Then I picked up The Nanny by Lana Ferguson, and this book was so good. I love the storyline, the spice was great, and I will read anything by Lana Ferguson from now on. Then I picked up Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I don't know what I was waiting for, and I gave it 5 stars. It was incredible. Obsessed with this story. Then I listened to the audiobook of Ace of Spades by Farida Abake Amide and loved this audiobook. Definitely one of my favorite audiobooks of the year. The story is amazing. Then I just dove headfirst into Hermione and Draco fanfiction, and I read Manacled by Sen-Lin Yu, and it was heartbreaking and beautiful and devastating, and read it as soon as possible. Next, I read one of Emily Henry's older books called A Million Junes, and although I didn't like it as much as her popular 4 books, I really enjoyed this book and it had me sobbing. Then I read Hopeless by Colleen Hoover. Not my favorite Colleen Hoover book, but enjoyed it. Then I listened to the audiobook of Boy Erase by Garrett Conley. I literally have a reading vlog where I pronounce his name wrong for 30 minutes, and I'm pretty sure I just pronounced it wrong then. But I enjoyed the audiobook. It is a sad story, but important to listen to. Then I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes because we were all in our Hunger Games era and I was getting ready for the movie, and I enjoyed the book. I gave it 3 stars, but I do think about it more than I thought I would after finishing it, so it's probably a higher rating than that. Then I read 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, and it was alright. Nothing memorable. Next I read Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is my favorite book of the year. I think I like this more than Beach Read, but they are both 5-star reads. Next I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It's a dark academia and a good one to start with, I guess, if you're getting into dark academia, because even my dumbass could understand it. Then Iron Flame was released and I read it. I wasn't impressed, but nonetheless it was so fun to be back in this world, and I think I still ended up rating it 4 stars, but it was way too long. Then I read That One Night by Emily Rath, and it was a fun, spicy novella. Then I read Credence by Penelope Douglas, and it took me like 2 months to get through this because I had told myself I was just gonna DNF it, like I can't go on. But then the crazy part of me said, no, you have to finish it and count it for your Goodreads challenge. So I finished it, and I do not recommend. I genuinely don't know what was going on in that book. But if you like it, I'm happy for you. Then I read The Hunger Games because we were all in our Hunger Games era and I wanted to reread the series after the movie came out. Loved it. I definitely want to finish the rest of the series in 2024. And that would be a reread, obviously. Then I picked up Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas because I told myself I'm finishing the Throne of Glass series. And I could not get into this book yet again. So I think I'm done with that series for now. Or for good. Don't hate me. Okay guys, we're in the home stretch. Then I listened to the audiobook of The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, and it was a good audiobook, but definitely not the most mind-blowing thriller I've ever read. Then I read Heir of Broken Fate by Mads Rafferty, who is a book talker or booktuber, and I was so excited to read it and support her, but to be honest, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. But still, nonetheless impressive that she wrote it, especially since she's the same age as me. Next, I listened to the Winter in Paradise trilogy on audiobook. All 3 of them. I did Winter in Paradise, What Happens in Paradise, and Troubles in Paradise. And the first one was good. Honestly, I recommend the first book and that's it. The second and third book had no plot. Then I read The Mister by E.L. James, which is the same author as 50 Shades of Grey, and it was just like an average read. Then I read Snowed In by Catherine Walsh, which is a cute holiday romance, and I was obsessed with it. 5 stars. Will be reading any book Catherine Walsh writes from now on. Then I read No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall, and I liked her writing style, but the ending or the plot twist of this book was confusing, and I don't think I actually know what ended up happening. I don't know if the author knew what happened. My second to last book I read this year was Powerless by Lauren Roberts, and I was not impressed. I think that book is overhyped. I enjoyed the writing style, but the story itself did not captivate me. And my last book of the year is The Honeymoon Crashers by Christina Lauren. It is the sequel to The Unhoneymooners, and it's an audiobook. It's 5 hours and it was adorable. Definitely recommend. It's a very high quality audiobook. Alright guys, those are the 105 books I read in 2023. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below because I always post book videos on this channel, and comment down below your favorite reads of 2023. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!